from children to adults.
Right. Now let me get a little back into your histories. How did you become a poet? I mean, one of the things is like, when did you make the decision to become a poet?
Right.
What was your impetus to become a poet? Where did you know that was your form?
When did I know it was my form? I want to say it was at Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
And I was studying with Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah.
And I had written a few love poems to get dates.
Yeah.
And I thought I signed up for her advanced poetry class, thinking I could write poetry. And I was real angry too at the time because Virginia Tech had invested and had not divested in apartheid.
Right.
And so I wrote these real fiery poems, and I would get C's and C minuses on them in her class. And I was really upset about that. And I remember going to talk to her about it, and I sat down across from her desk, and I was like, Nikki, I grew up reading Spin a Soft Black Song. I know your poetry. My parents were in the Black Arts movement. I'm Kwame Alexander.
That's in line.
I'm next, and you giving me C minuses. And I was like, and I had been listening to a lot of jazz music. This is when I discovered jazz music. My dad's albums from the Air Force, and I was listening to a lot of Ella. No, I was listening to a lot of Nancy Wilson. Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And I was playing, like I would write love poems to get dates, and then I'd play the records at my house. So that's a whole nother story, but, and so I sat across from her, I was like, Nikki, I'm writing poems, I'm coming with the authenticity like Nancy Wilson. You need to listen to Nancy Wilson. And she looked at me and she's like, have you ever heard of Ella Fitzgerald? You need to listen to Ella Fitzgerald if you really want to talk about authenticity. And I remember saying, look, I don't think I deserve a C. And she said, Kwame, I can teach you how to write a poem, but I can't teach you how to be interesting.
Ooh, that sounds exactly like Nancy. Nikki. That sounds that sounds exactly like Nikki. Yep.
And so we had a back and forth that didn't end too well. And for 3 years, I got C's in her classes, and you talking about. That was 1990, so you're talking about almost 30 years ago, and we probably talk every other day now.
Yeah.
And my mother passed away 2 years ago.
Right.
And Nikki was at the funeral, and Nikki doesn't go to funerals.
Yeah.
She doesn't like funerals.
Yeah.
And I asked her, why'd you come? And it was the first time she'd ever cursed at me. She's like, why wouldn't I be there?
Yeah.
She said, your mother's gone, and I need you to know you have another mother.
Oh, yeah.
That's where I sort of discovered that I was gonna be a poet.
Right.
It was in her class.
Yeah. That's great. Nikki is a dynamo. Now, in terms of art, what was is it when you first woke up? You were 6 months old?
It probably was,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any memories of not liking to draw or make images.
Right.
But I didn't get really, I mean, I drew all the time. I was one of those kids. I was not a big reader. Actually, I really hated reading as a little boy. I was one of those kids.
My son.
I loved stories,
Yeah.
but I didn't like reading because a lot of what I was reading was about things I wasn't interested in. And I didn't discover a love of reading until I was 16 and I read the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Oh, yeah.
But as far as art is, I drew all the time. And I got really serious about it when I studied with my uncle Mike. He's an artist and art teacher, and he took me. I became his apprentice when I was 10, 11 years old.
Oh, wow.
So he gave me a very strong foundation in art, taught me about, gave me the ABCs of art, from lighting, color, perspective, and so forth. And I had a piece of paper, a drawing I had done one summer, and I left it in the corner. My aunt Libby, his wife, she came over and said, you need to take better care of this stuff. This is going to be your bread and butter. You need to protect your gift. And after that summer, I just really took it seriously.
Really?
You know?
Really? Really? One of the things that I think between art and poetry, oftentimes these are the two places that people in society, I'm not saying us or people in this room, society kind of devalue. They don't really, poets are seen sometimes as the people who are going to have the insight, but don't really know about whether or not that should be something, for example, a young person in here should actually pursue. If we have any young poets in here, what would you say would be your advice to them in terms of finding their voice as poets?
I think it's so I have an art and I have a commerce or a trade answer to that question. The art answer is you gotta read everything you can get your hands on. Like the way we find our voice is by reading as much as possible. And that's why I try to write books for young people using poetry that's accessible, that's cool, I think, that's relatable to them, because I find that if they connect with Crossover or Rebound or one of my novels, then they're more apt to then want to go and sort of mimic that. Well, how do I write something like that? Or where else can I find another book that uses poetry and language like that? The other piece of it is the commerce part of it, and that is, you know, being a poet is not necessarily associated with making a living. It's not even not necessarily, it ain't. Right?
Unless you're Nikki Giovanni.
Unless you're Nikki Giovanni or you know, or Billy Collins or someone of that stature. And so when I was at Virginia Tech, I remember seeing Nikki, like she would leave, she wouldn't teach one day because she'd go speak somewhere and she would make like 10 grand. Like she would share this stuff with us. And I was like, wow, it can be done. And I remember like coming out of college and starting a publishing company and publishing my poetry and trying to sell books and realizing that I had to get out in public and sell books. People weren't just gonna go into SO1 and buy my books because they didn't know who I was. And so I came to LA with a friend of mine to a church, I wanna say it was called Maranatha, right? And at the end of the service, the pastor, this was like 20-something years ago, somebody may have been in the congregation, but the pastor asked me to come up and I got to share a poem. And we were selling books after the service in the gift shop. And I was like, this is my moment. This is my moment. I had 160 books in the trunk of the rental car. And so I got up in Maranatha and I shared a love poem. It was really suggestive too.
In the church.
In church. It was lips like yours ought to be worshipped. See, I ain't never been too religious, but you can baptize me anytime. And this lady in the back of the church said, hallelujah. I sold 160 books. And so over the years, many of the poets who started out writing with me are now working 9-to-5 jobs, doing stuff that they aren't necessarily in love with, but they have families. And I sort of realized very early on that I wanted to make a living from it. And I got a lot of flack from it. I got called all kinds of names, like you're exploiting poetry and you're a poetry pimp and all this kind of stuff. I mean, all kinds of names. But I always had my eyes on the prize because I knew what Nikki Giovanni had done. I knew that Langston Hughes in 1926 had written The Weary Blues and got in a car in Harlem and traveled from Harlem to Daytona Beach selling his book in churches, in theaters, in community centers. I knew the power of being able to bridge the gap between art and commerce.